Hello and welcome back to PA Chalk Up. I'm your host Manny, and today we have Nate. Hi Nate, how we doing?
I'm doing good. How are you, man?
I'm good. Obviously, we've just done another burner with Tree
Mhm.
for an upcoming episode,
Yeah,
but we thought we'd chop it up a little bit longer and get into some of the nuances that we were speaking on that episode.
yeah.
Um, but before we start, obviously, just quickly run down who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are. Have you ever wondered how I'm able to run my business, my podcast, and still be able to coach? Well, I use TeamBuildr. TeamBuildr is an all in one coaching software that reduces the amount of time that we spend on the back end of programming, on our Google Sheets, on our Excels, and allows me more freedom to do testing. With this podcast and episodes, I'm actually able to run some programs that I learned through different coaches coming on. To find out how you can use TeamBuildr and how it can apply to your own program, visit the link in the description and catch yourself a 30-day free trial. Just simply use code PACHOCUP, that's PACHALQUP, and start the next stage of your coaching career.
Absolutely. So me and Manny met through University of Washington. Were able to partake in the strength conditioning program over there. So being part of the staff. So that was awesome. That was 2022. And here we are halfway through the decade of the 2020s. And we're still working together, trying to pick each other's brains, still helping each other out with, even though he's in Scotland, I'm over here in Seattle in the US, still helping each other out, still building our relationship. And yeah, I'm strength and conditioning coach at Maximum Sports Conditioning in Bellevue, Washington. I work with pro, collegiate, high school, youth athletes. You say it, you name it, I got it. So working with everyone in between. And then, yeah, and then I love training, love educating myself and others. And yeah, and if you want a little bit more information as well, you could look at episode 8 that me and Manny did. Or you can look at
I
the episode, whatever episode
Yeah,
choose yours and I's are, which is episode 80, you said?
it'll be a series of its own.
Oh, okay.
So
Awesome.
this will probably be 80
Oh,
in the
there you go.
numbers of things.
I
Yeah.
guess so. Okay.
But no, so some takeaways I got in that conversation was
Yeah.
um after I landed, I was sort of talking this new theory that I'm coming up with and
Hmm.
how it can apply a little bit more directly to certain game like situations. And obviously, I want to get your take based on what you were saying. But
Hmm.
my theory is essentially what can happen if we mix VBT and some of its metrics and cognitive skills to then sort of be able to move fast and explosive and still hit some of that cognitive fatigue so that when we get into game like situation, we're a
Yeah.
little bit more equipped to deal with those loads. But if we just backtrack a little bit and talk about the way that you're using VBT and how that's working in your program.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. So, in the previous episode that Manny and I talked about strength conditioning, so episode 8, we talked about kind of the conjugate bias program that I work through, and then the little projects I wanted to work on in the future. So the future is in reference to that episode. It is now, so it's the present. So we've had some time in between to experiment, work some nicks and crannies out. And I gotta say, there's a lot that I learned. There's a lot I figured out, and I still have a lot to learn, and I want to experiment with too. Because when we think about VBT, we think about linear encoders. I think we have some experience with that at UW as well, through Perch and everything of that sort too. So some of the metrics that we are familiar with or that we got to be introduced with was so some things such as peak velocity, average velocity, some power metrics, right? And then I think that was kind of the meat and potatoes of it. Obviously, don't want to go too deep into that as that's not our place to expose certain program nuances, but it's pretty some things that are talked about in essency. But what I really wanted to focus on this year is time to peak velocity and kind of working under the realm of how do we get this filament binding theory. So, and we talked about earlier in the previous episode as well. The episode that we were just in seemed like it was just previous, but who knows? There might be some gaps between that and us. But I got
It'll
into
just be a week.
yeah,
It'll
yeah,
be a week
exactly.
gap.
There we go. Awesome. That works out perfect. But if you want to learn more about that or listen to more about that, you could listen to that episode in particular. But that's kind of where my mind has been throughout this last year and some change since the last time me and Manny really got to talk on the pod. So through that, I've been using eNode Pro. So it was previously called VMAX Pro. And the awesome thing about that is all the metrics that I've been encountered with and worked with before, there's that and some more as well. So there's the ability for me to track eccentric velocities, eccentric rate of force development, time to peak velocity, and those are kind of the main three ones that I was able to experiment with, taking into consideration everything else as well. So I'm trying to manipulate the dynamic isometric strength phase. So the last few degrees of the eccentric going from iso to concentric as well. So let's see. There we go. Okay, there you go. I kind of freaked out for a second. You kind of, yeah, I didn't see you.
Yeah,
For
I
like,
was
oh,
trying to get
yeah, awesome.
I
Okay,
was trying to get that I'm a little bit more reserved to share companies' names and profiles nowadays,
mhm.
but I do really like as well, so I don't mind sharing their stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's what I've been dealing with for the most part with that as well. There's some other little projects and side projects that um, I have in the works too that I'm still theorizing, seeing how it works within the logistics too. Because I've listened to awesome strength conditioning coaches, awesome track coaches, awesome researchers. And the great thing that is they work with high level athletes, and then you're able to pick and pull and they're able to kind of standardize everything, right? Now, there's differences too, as I said, vast majority of the population that I work with is for long-term athletic development, right? So they are 18 and under for with strength conditioning. Obviously, I work with college and or pro athletes as well, but that's very few and far in between compared to the vast majority that makes up my days. So I want to make sure that obviously the things that work at the elite level work, but I got to make sure that I could also improve that, in terms of the long term athletic development model at all spectrums of training ages as well. So,
Yeah.
because we know the good things work with the greats, but the good things also work with people that need to get there as well. So,
Hmm.
yeah, and I think we talked about it as well. Are people athletic despite their training, or due to their training? So I
Mm,
think that's kind of a big part of it as well,
yeah.
right?
Can you break down a little bit more into this 1 RM percentage based instead of the true conventional 1 RM?
Yeah. So to clarify first, I still use a one RMs with a lot of my
Mm,
athletes as well. So it's not like that's gone, but something that I did mention in the previous podcast is looking for their one power mats. So their 1 p.m., right? One rep power mats. So what ability they're able to produce power through. So let's say they're able to produce their 1 p.m. is 5,000 watts, right? So if I have that as a week one tester, I'm like, okay, I test their back squat, I test their high bot squat, I test their low bot squat, whatever it may be, right? Quarter squat, eighth squat, whatever the event person may be, I test that out. That gives me a training percentage that I have to work with. So my philosophy that I work with is we want to be able to train power through velocity, not through force, right? There's a time and place to train the force portion of it, and I think that'd be more towards GP periods of a training cycle of a year as well.
and by
But
GP we mean general preparation.
mhm,
Yeah.
yes, yes. And going just not to go on sidetrack as well, but traditional GP periods have been, extended out to like 4 6 weeks. When I think about it too, like I've gotten away with just 2 weeks, 2 weeks. Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of
Mm,
the gist of that. But I think about this slower velocities, higher force during GP periods, and as well as I do accumulation intensification as well. So that's kind of what I was experiencing with. So obviously, all introduce higher force exercises, slower velocity exercises within that spectrum as well. So it's not like they're completely out the midst. So it's always kind of training all variables of speed throughout training cycles in the year as well. So with trying to accelerate or produce more power through velocity, that's how we progress it. I'm able to train 90% of the peak power. So if we're looking at almost like a parabola, right? So for you, Manny, you might look a little different because it's mirrored and everything of that sort. But if we're looking at a parabola, I am looking at the left side of that in order to get that 90%, which would be the more velocity side of the power. If I look to the right of it, that'd be the 110%, so the more force side of it. So we are training both sides of that spectrum within a training session in order to create power. So the middle, so the top portion of the power, so the 1 p.m. So we are training both sides of the spectrum in order to create power, not train it. We train power when we peak. And I noticed that when I was able to finally peak some of my athletes too, and not so much for their sport in itself, but more for testing weeks, right? So during the summertime, and I said I experimented a lot with this during the summertime as well. So for Seattle, that would be Mayish, June-ish until like late August, September-ish. Because in our facility too, we run outside, so we'll do flying tens with 10-yard lead-ins, 15-yard lead-ins. So that was for speed. That was kind of a big KPI. So how will that relate back to their sport as well? So especially for the track athletes, or let's say for the off-ball athletes for football. So the receivers, DBs, everything that sort. That was a good test, right? So with the 10-yard lead-ins, we'd kind of test that in the middle, in the beginning of summer, and we'd always sprint every single session, right? Besides if they were doing upper body, and if they were doing an upper body session, they'd be doing some type of resisted sprints as well. So not so much training until they're done, but training that force vector. So with every training session that they did lower body and they were sprinting, I was always able to test kind of where they were at in the training cycle. Whether if they were a little bit more fatigued, whether if we were like, okay, I know they're not running as fast because we're in the accumulation phase. I know in 1 week, because I would do 2-1-2-1. So accumulation, deload, intensification, deload. I would know that, okay, the reason why they're running slower is because we're doing more forceful things right now. And then with that, sometimes their flying 10 times wouldn't be as fast, but they're actually counter movement jumps and dynamic jumps. So their approach jumps, whether if they jump off one or two legs, would actually be higher. So I'm like, okay, because it's a longer ground contact time event, right? So if we think about high jump, right, that's around like 300, 350 milliseconds, right? Obviously, we don't test the high jump in my facility. We got the vertex, right? So that's our dynamic jump. So because it's a longer ground contact time event, thus more force, right? So more force over a period of time, so impulse. That's going up. So I know the training's working, but their flying 10 isn't really moving, or it's kind of fatigued a little bit. So that's when I know, okay, we're in the accumulation phase. Now we got a deload. And the intensification phase, we're intensifying through velocities and not so much force, and also time to peak velocities. So how relative we are able to accelerate the bar in order to it to be specific to our event. So closing that gap between the weight room and the event itself. So
Hmm.
in this case, let's just say sprinting, right? So a couple are flying 10 times, so 10-yard flies with 10-yard lead-ins. We already had fast athletes with, creating through our force and everything of that sort. So I would say more force bias programming. So I'd have athletes run about 1.02 for their flying 10 with the 10-yard lead-in. So that translates to roughly about, and I'm talking about yards, not meters. And this is roughly about 20 miles per hour. So that'd be 10-yard lead-in, 10-yard fly, and everything of that sort. I was able to get people running down to 0.94. So that's 21, 22, damn near 23 miles per hour, right? So with that though, so that'd be during the intensification phase, even during deload, and even during the phase after that. So their flying times would go down technically. So
Hmm.
going up, but
That's what you
going,
want.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But there sometimes their jumps wouldn't go up, or sometimes their jumps would just stay stagnant or get worse. So there's kind of a trade-off, right? That's what I found as well. And I think the reason why that trade-off is because sometimes it's difficult having an athlete in once or twice a week, right? You kind of bias in one side of that 1 p.m. mats, right? So the one power mats, right? And especially too, like how fast do we need to get for, let's say, baseball if they're running 30 yards. Obviously, you got the 60-yard test for for their showcases and everything that sort of. But how really fast do we need to get them, or how high do I really need my second baseman to jump? You know what I'm saying? So maybe focus more on speed, right? So one of the fastest athletes that we kind of saw over the summer ran 9.4 or 9.3. I kind of forget at the top of my head. He was a soccer fella, but he's fast, right? And then
What's soccer?
obviously, yeah, soccer. He's a soccer
What
fella.
is it though?
What was that?
What is soccer?
Oh, football. Excuse me. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, but yeah, he was a football fella, right? So college. Yeah, I think he was 19 or 20 at the time. I forget, but
Oh,
yeah, so 19 or 20. So he's running that fast at that age, right? So his jumping was crap. Like I'll be honest, and I'm not gonna put him on blast in terms of name, but his jumping was crap, and I'm very close with him too. He wasn't, and he's about 5'8", 5'9", so obviously not a basketball player or anything of that sort. But he wasn't able to touch 10 feet on the vertex. So his CMJ was also, he wasn't able to touch 30 or anything of that sort. He was like 28,
oh,
29, everything of that sort. So as indicative as counter movement jump was good for vertical force, it wasn't as indicative for sprinting in itself. And the reason why I think that is because we would actually measure time to peak velocity, so TPVs during the CMJs. And we would actually see not the people with the highest vertical jumps, but the quickest TPVs, so the lowest amount of milliseconds, to be the most elastic. And we're talking about elasticity. Obviously, we have fascia, tenderness, but for sprinting specifically, it's about inter and intramuscular coordination. So how fast you could bring the wheel around, right? Because your limiting factor is how fast you could cycle your foot from point A to point B cyclically in a row, right?
mhm,
Especially as you go into Max V. So that was kind of our KPI for our quickest people. So not so much your height on your CMJ, but your TPV, right? And this is because they're able to kind of accelerate really fast, right? Now, our CMJ people that had very high vertical jumps, very good at the first 10 yards, very good at the first 10 yards. We get them down to like 148, 142. So first 10 yards, just from the line, right? Very, very powerful people, very forceful people. But after that, they did not excel as much compared to the people with the quicker TPVs during the CMJs. And like I said, being in Seattle, Washington, it's overcast and rainy for 90% of the year. So having the bay doors open at our facility, that's when we're able to utilize that 10-yard fly with 10 to 15 yards of lead in. So technically 20 to 25 yards, depending on the day, right? So that would just be a test that we would be only able to run in the summer. So taking that into account too, with programming, with that accumulation phase to intensification, we would kind of see those numbers skew time to time. So on the more forceful phases, CMJs would go up, stat or dynamic jumps would go up, whereas sprints would kind of be in the middle or get better, not by a lot though. But then once we kind of go into that progressing through velocity, so that 90% to 1 p.m., that's when those sprints really got quick off the ground. Yeah.
mhm,
So with this as well, and then just an example, this is not just the bread and butter of everything, but as an example, one of the athletes, I had them do doubles of a half squat at 90% of their 1 p.m. And then in between each sets, I'll do 6 sets of doubles. This doesn't take into consideration their warm ups. I'd have them do drop squats on a bear squat. So it is not a free falling. It's not a bar. It's not a free weight. It's a bear squat. So there's a curve to it in terms of force. So I would have them throw bands on there for overspeed eccentrics in order to increase or find an adaptation in terms of that filament binding theory. So increasing the speed of the eccentric. So we're not getting stronger from the eccentric just by training it slow and forceful, but we're getting stronger and more powerful in the concentric due to or increasing the velocity of the eccentric. All right. So we do drop squats on the bear squat. We go like 3 to 6 repetitions depending on the day or depending on the phase of the cycle. And they were able to load up about 250 pounds on there in mass, and that doesn't take in consideration band tension as well. I think the band tension we used was It would vary, but it's anywhere from 70 pounds to 150 pounds, depending on the athlete or time to time.
Mm.
And then we'd run into logistics as well because we only have one bear squat. So I'd prefer a Kaiser power squat, but we don't have that. So, right.
Yeah.
So
I had a question on a point that you had
yeah,
earlier. Um, but what considerations are you implementing on
yeah.
walk on fatigue?
Walk on fatigue, yeah.
Yeah.
So the CMJ jump, and then also too, it's very tough too, especially with the fact that, like I said, most of my athletes are in high school. I get most of the college athletes back in the summertime because everyone's done for break and then everything of that sort. But if we're just talking about high school athletes too, that's kind of when everything starts picking up. Obviously, no school, but their activity level actually increases because they're doing their travel team now because they could actually travel to different states for their sport. Then they're doing their private lessons. Then they're doing their team practices. And then they might be playing another sport too. So in terms of activity level, they might be doing even more compared to during their school year, right? So obviously, anytime that they're in, we're kind of taking consideration, at least under that paradigm with VBT, walk on fatigue, right? And we would see it too. Like we all have very good relationships with our athletes. So you could even see it in their eyes. You could see it physically too. You could see it slouched in the shoulders. So it's um, knowing athlete personality types as well. But in terms of actual metrics as well, time to peak velocity was actually an excellent metric for us to measure for fatigue because it's very one of the hardest things for the human body to do is to accelerate a light object fast, right? You've seen it before too. Yeah, I mean we've seen it working together, and then I'm sure you've seen it on Instagram or anywhere else too in strength conditioning or training in general. That someone might feel crappy, like real bad one day, like
Mm.
2 hours of sleep.
But they'll peak. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they're feeling terrible, right? 2 hours of sleep. Maybe their girlfriend broke up with them or something of that sort, or maybe mom made the wrong type of lasagna. Who knows, right? Their sprints will be crap that day due to the high neurological stimulus that it requires, due to the speed of inter and intramuscular coordination that it's required. Jumps, dynamic jumps, it's all right. Static jumps, yeah, it's a little better, but still terrible, right? But they'll be able to kind of grind out a heavy 1RM maybe in terms of likelihood because it's way slower in terms of time to peak velocity, so milliseconds, and also muscle coordination, right? And the reason why I mentioned time to peak velocity for that one as well, if we think about like traditional, like I got this from Fred Hatfield, so Dr. Squat, you'll and also Louis Simmons, so they're very two people that are influential in terms of my train of thought. But you're not going to fail a lift because it's too heavy. You're going to fail a lift because the bar decelerates. So you're not able to accelerate through your sticking point. So that's why even in Louis was stuck for his bench press for a long time. And he was doing, 65% to 85%. So working on the four sides of things. And this is without VBT, right? But when he started doing dynamic effort with 50%, so kind of in that middle ground, all of a sudden, because he had speed to accelerate, the mass on the bar, he was able to push past his sticking points because it's not about how far or how strong you are, it's or how long you could accelerate the bar before it does its work and before you get gassed out. But yeah, so that's why I go back to TPV with that. So even though TPV is kind of a newer thing as well, yeah, the hardest thing the human body has to do is accelerate a light object very fast. So if you're already
Mm.
fatigued from that and you're not able to do it because of the coordination it takes, then you're not going to be able to do the adaptation or be within the power levels that you want. So
Mm.
now let's say if my athlete that was producing 5,000 watts of power for their peak power, we're out of that. Now my 90% is going to skew as well. So, right. But if they're obviously having some type of like connective tissue injury, anything of that sort, let's say their knees hurting, shoulders hurting, whatever it may be, under my expertise, I'll take them aside and see what I could do about it. So I know we've talked about reflexive performance reset in the past, so RPR on the previous podcast. So that's something that I'll implement. I'll obviously take them through any type of FMS. Usually, I don't use FMS that often. I'll take them through traditional, just manual muscle testing and everything of that sort. So having them do neurological isometrics as well. I'll take them through voodoo flossing. I'll take them through everything just to make sure they feel good. So if it's a biomechanical thing or if it's a connective tissue thing where things just aren't gliding as easily as they are, I have some source of capability to help them out with that as well. If it's not just a fatigue, like a
Hmm.
neurological fatigue. So yeah, but going back to that TPV to taking consideration fatigue, that's where a lot of things were. Because I would also do a test too. So it'd be 20, 40, 60, 80. And I wouldn't always do 100, but only a few athletes were able to do 100. And I'm talking about kilograms. So 20, 40, 60, 80, that is 80 is where I kind of start taking and weeding out a lot of athletes. And 100 is, I really wouldn't have many of my athletes do this. But it was for those kilograms, I would have them be doing a jump squat with a barbell. So now you're
Okay.
literally getting a force velocity spectrum, and they would send me this data through the e-note as well. So with this, I kind of know week one when everything's as controlled as we can, possibly take in consideration, right? Because we know life isn't perfect. So even though if we try to
Hmm.
programmatically try to be like, okay, don't eat this, get this many hours of sleep, drink this much water. I need you to be 100% week one, day one, right? It's not going to happen, right? We've tried that. It just doesn't happen. We pull our hair out for it, right? So yeah, I'm getting there. Yeah, yeah. I've been wearing hats a little too often now. People are starting but yeah, yeah, you
But what are some of
yeah,
the
yeah.
actual changes in the program that you are making to help them perform the next day?
The next day, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you said? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
for
like what programming is changing when you are testing these things and they are lagging a little bit?
yeah, so it's we always deload or take into consideration volume, not so much intensity. So we want to be able to try in intensity year round long, unless obviously if there's any contraindication to it, right? But when I mean intensity, I'm talking about bar speed, right? So intensities change throughout the year. So if I'm having someone that has, let's say, a showcase tomorrow, like we're probably not touching the bear squat, we're probably not touching like a back squat, we're probably not sprinting or anything of that sort, right? So we did it quite a bit too. You and I will do a lot of like iso, like overcoming isos, everything of that sort. We'll do concentric jumps, so very easy landings, everything of that sort. We'll do more mobility focused things. So let's say if they do have to perform better one day or the other, then we kind of have that knowledge to bias that as well. Um, but yeah, so taking into consideration just how much, because this type of training, I will say, it wasn't so muscular demanding, but it was very neurologically intensive,
Mm,
at least for the parameters that we wanted. Because if you don't get enough rest, you're not going to hit the TPVs that were written down for your program. Because moving something at 70 to 80 milliseconds is very, very tough. Obviously, that's we would probably only do that during our pogo hops. But if your body wasn't able to do that, then that's when we got to take into consideration. Okay, we got to kind of change some things throughout. So some people would think, okay, so that means just take out pogo hops. No, I still need them to do some type of equal complex thing. So whether if it's like a overcoming isometric for a soleus, or whether if it's just a um, gastroc raise, right, with the bar, they're like, oh, you're loading them up. That doesn't make sense. Well, because their body's able to coordinate things slower because you're under load, we're still taking consideration, and we're not doing a lot of volume on it, right? And we're not doing minimal volume. We're doing optimal volume. And that's actually something Mel Siff said to Louis Simmons when they would kind of speak about training. Because Louis was like, oh, like, why? Like, I train maximally. So why would I ever train minimally? And then Siff was, well, don't train maximally, don't train minimally, train optimally, right? So the term like minimum effective dose has been
mhm.
in, but we want the optimal effective dose, right? And that will change obviously session to session, week to week, day to day, month to month, right? Depending on what buckets that we need to fill throughout the year.
Yeah.
It's not as much as what we do right now compared to that, but I would say during this past year with the experiment of VBT, that was kind of the gist of it on my part.
Mhm.
I was able to program.
That's why during the episode we just did, I brought up the non-flexible app flexible nonlinear periodization, because essentially what we're doing is we're creating three different types of sessions so that no matter how an athlete is coming in, we can still apply that stimulus. And like what you mentioned is training optimally instead of the minimum effective dose, right? So at that point, any session that they come into, they can train optimally because we can sort of gauge where they're at. So it's
Yeah.
based on a like a three session system. So you've got your peak strength, you've got your peak power. So
Hmm.
like if you're like close to 100%, we're going to do some heavy shit. Like we're moving weight.
Hmm.
If you're not 100% feeling right, but you're also not terrible, we're going to probably check you on that power and just work a little bit on the velocity side of things.
Hmm.
And then if you're completely fatigued, then you're going to do more like hypertrophy, more uh, mitigative work. That's essentially to, again, just tie in the optimal performance. So I'm
Hmm.
wondering is like, how would you sort of see that implemented in currently the way that your system's functioning?
Well, I'll say this: it would make my life easier, right? So,
Like and
yeah.
again, like I, I've done an episode that won't be out
Hmm.
before this, but
Yeah.
I sort of spoke about I did a webinar for the Italian Strength and Conditioning Association,
Yeah. There's
and
I saw that a little bit. Yeah.
huh?
Yeah, I saw that you posted that, but I was like, oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's, yeah.
Which is like I'm super fortunate to be in those positions, but I kind of introduced flexible nonlinear periodization there. And again, I'm a systems guy, a principle guy, not a method guy. Like
Mhm. Yeah.
we both learned that no matter what method, you there could be something wrong with it. So it's better to fill our toolbox with as many tools so we can adjust to each situation that comes up.
Hmm.
But essentially, I wrote three sessions, the exact same session. So there was a hinge, there was a push, there was a pull,
Yeah.
vertical and horizontal. Um, I did that session, and the exercises were all the same. All that changed was the intent. So, which was super like it's a fascinating way to change the program as well as like playing around and tinkering with the intent of the session. So, like
Hmm.
the first session, which was a heavy session, we had um, I think I had split jerk
Hmm.
into a pull up.
Yeah.
Like it was very like basic programming, like as basic as you can get.
Yeah.
But I had like high weight for those two, and then the next session was a more speed, so I had like a little bit more explosivity in there. So it was lighter weights, but you were
Hmm.
sort of being able to express more velocity and more force there. And the
Hmm.
last one we were just doing like a seated uh, uh, shoulder press.
Yeah.
And it's like, I was like, what's the difference between these exercises? Like, well, nothing. I was like, exactly. Like, you can still program, and it doesn't take that long to write three sessions, same exercise, but all that changes is the intent.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, for me, that's, I'm trying to see where I can apply different principles to that. So, I kind
Yeah.
of have like your bands, your chains, but
Yeah.
then how can we change that for each tier?
Yeah, I mean that's a very good question too, because especially taking into consideration fatigue, right? That's, I mean, the biggest thing that you'll run into running with athletes, right? You could write the perfect program, but if you're not able to, if they're not able to recover, then your program is not going to mean anything in the long run, right?
Mm,
Now, whether if it's they can't recover from your programming, or if they can't recover from sports
the
practice,
sessions, yeah.
or if they can't recover from just the stresses of life, then you got to take in consideration that as well. It's like the role specificity, right? So with like Charlie Francis, um, like he used the weight room as a general stimulus. Like, but here's the thing: everyone can't like squat 500 pounds like Ben Johnson, right? So, but he would say that certain demographics of athletes would be able to handle some specific work closer to, let's say, the competitive season, whereas some athletes needed more general work. So think about like muscular versus elastic or anything of that sort, right? Because let's say for faster movements, there are more energy expensive in terms of being close to the event of the sport, or something general, let's say like a back squat, or a little bit further away from that. And this is the kind of thought process I'm going through too, with the whole general, and then even like closing the gap with time to peak
Hmm.
velocity. I'm always drawing myself in circles in terms of like application of these, because everyone, like, we are standing on the shoulders of giants in this
Yep.
industry, right? So obviously give due diligence, but also like how do we implement this with our person, with our team, with
Hmm.
this situation, that situation, and then obviously trying to create better situations for people, such as which is what you're asking about right now too. So I think too, it's obviously fatigue is a big thing. Time to peak velocity would be a nice metric to take into consideration, but I know it's not available for everyone as well.
Hmm.
But something such as like, I mean, tracking peak velocities or average velocity as well is always good consideration. I know with my Olympic lifts, and we actually talked on the last podcast, I wasn't a huge fan of Olympic lifts. Or I shouldn't say fan, but it's not a huge implementation of the program that I have for my athletes, right? Not saying that I don't do them, but it just wasn't something I was doing as much. I'll say during this past year with VBT, I implemented a little bit more. Um, but I'll say this: there's certain numbers during the Olympic lifts that if my athletes didn't hit, the rest of that would be pretty indicative for the rest of their session.
Hmm.
And then I'm not thinking of load too, right? I'm thinking of eccentric speed, eccentric bar speed. I'm talking about like time to peak velocity. Concentric bar speed is always kind of iffy too. Like it's good if you can't find something, but I think there's other metrics to
Hmm.
look at. Peak power is good. It's just sometimes it's very sporadic from rep to rep or set to rep, especially if you contrast things. I did a lot of contrasting when I was doing a lot of VBT things, and it worked well. But especially taking that in consideration too, there's going to be a lot of outlying numbers when tracking VBT and fatigue as well. But anytime I found that there was kind of some numbers that were off with the Oli lifts, it was pretty indicative of how the rest of their session would be as well. And
Hmm.
then for me too, I didn't always do Oli lifts first. Sometimes it'd be the second lift in the program. Sometimes it'd be the third lift in the program. And I know that you would think always Oli lifts first, but if I already had them sprint, right? Yeah.
So I'm a big believer of PAP.
Yeah.
Like you you have to prepare for explosivity.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like and like when we're looking at neurological prep as well, it's like
Yeah.
more times or not you're doing PAP because you're
Absolutely.
stressing the system either very heavily or
Mhm.
very explosive. So
Yeah.
like I you might have found this as well, but sometimes when you push your weight the highest, you'll end up being a little bit faster the next day or
Yeah.
the next session. It's uh, it's still not 100% known as to why or how, but
Mhm.
it is a thing that happens. Like my sprint athlete, if I know he's got competition, I'm asking him to go into the gym the day before, and I'm stressing him out um,
Yeah.
in that way because like for him, I know it works, so I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we were talking about that pop and sort of stressing the CNS systems a little bit
Yes.
more before competitions where we need them to peak.
Mhm. Yeah. So, yeah, real question, a quick question. Thanks for bringing that up, by the way. So, with your athlete, this sprinter, how are you tracking this? Just out of curiosity as well.
Um, so I've had him since we were both 18.
Oh wow.
Um,
Yeah.
so he was my very first athlete. So I know where he's at, and he sort of understands his body really well.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
for me, I will let him go into the gym himself, and I'll be like, "Hey, we're working 80, 90 RM," and he'll
Mhm.
be able to follow that. Or if he's sort of having an off day, but he still wants to go in, we'll switch and go RPE, and that's fine for him.
Mhm.
Um, so for that particular athlete, I know I can sort of give him enough pop to peak him for the next day, and he's I mean fortunate with him that he's always won quite a lot, so we kind of know that it works.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm not tracking it as in metrics per se, but
Mhm.
with athletes I am sort of measuring. it
Yeah,
will be. I mean, again, budgets weren't big at the time, but
yeah, yeah.
like a phone app does just as good.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because even for me, right? Some track athletes that I had, because they're running, they should be running year round long, right? So whether whatever their event is, right? So I'm a big believer in my bias from short to long in terms of looking at sprints, right? Even if the weight room, everything of that sort, right? So Charlie Francis. Now, a lot of my athletes during, let's say a weightlifting session, they would have a sprint session later in the afternoon. Not with me, but let's say if they have a track workout they need to do, um, that's kind of what we did for the most part, right? But anything that we did in the weight room, and I gotta thank Rolf for this. So Rolf Omen, he mentioned that your nervous system will remember the velocities and the speeds of the activities that you just did. So not so much and then not potentiation so much, but not the motor unit recruitment as well, but the velocities of the contraction. So the velocities that the new muscles had to fire. So if I'm doing a VBT session, so I'll just call it VBT. But if I'm staying within certain TPVs, if I'm doing my step ups and I'm moving 100 kilos under 120 milliseconds, right? With a lot of velocity as well, so like about 1.3 PV, right? My body's going to remember that for whatever I got to do later in the day as well. So if I did have situations like that, most of the time you would think like, oh, hit your special strength exercises. So let's say like hip hikes with med balls or your reverse hyper, everything of that sort. And that was always something kind of in my back of the mind too, that I was always circling around with like that is a great statement to think about. Like your nervous system will remember the velocities that you're doing. But since they're with me right now, should I also after that do like, let's say like working through thoracic extension, everything that
Mm.
sort? Oh, should I do my very slow single leg work, to keep them healthy? And what I found was, and it's really tough, and I still draw myself in circles with it, but I found that their performance for later in their track session, and then most of the time they were not really measuring anything as well. They're just hand timing it. Literally, they're
Mhm.
sprinting at the line. They themselves are sprinting, and then they do whatever they got.
Okay.
They hand time it. So it's very, very janky, right? So they don't even have anyone there to time it themselves. Or just from a feelings based perspective, they'll be like, oh, I felt better, I felt faster, I felt awesome, everything of that sort, right? So anytime we would kind of stick with that, they would feel great. Even when we would throw the special strength exercises in, they still felt great, but there was kind of a more of a I did need a little bit more time to recover, right? So I would say my higher level athletes benefited a lot from that. So the speed, doing the speed stuff, not last, but ending off with things the nervous system would remember,
Mm.
right? Whereas my athletes that didn't produce as much force, they could kind of go through the full workout and just be like, oh, I still sprinted fast later in the evening, right? Just because their force outputs are lower. So that's kind of what I found, and I'm still kind of drawing myself in circles and thinking about the what's, where's, and why's about it.
I think that's what's great about the way that we've sort of been taught and exposed is like it comes from a very experimental um aspect where we'll tinker with things and adjust things and move them about to a point that like we're always conceptualizing these theories in our head and then we're like, I
Mhm.
wonder if that actually works. And then you
Yeah,
like there's like this little trickle effect where we first try on ourselves and then if it works to the way that we like it, we implement it to our higher, more receptive athletes, and
mhm.
then if that works, then we trickle it down to the younger levels and the
Yeah,
less experienced levels, and then it sort of builds out the system. And to a point
yeah,
that you had before, we we kind of can't just do one thing for everyone, or we can't say this is definite a thing that works because, like you mentioned before, like I don't have your athletes, you don't have my athletes, like
mhm.
not everything that you implement is going to work for me because my athletes may not respond the same way.
Yeah. They might like the food better in Seattle too, so that could
Oh,
be a
they
huge.
definitely would.
Yeah, yeah, so
Big
those.
portions,
Yeah, big
bro.
portions.
Do you like one thing that still torments me is
Mhm.
when we went to get chicken waffle
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah. I got
my
you.
fat ass thought it was fucking ice cream and it was
Yeah,
fucking butter. Oh, I
yeah.
was pissed. I was livid.
You still like the butter though. Yeah.
No, I didn't. I hate butter.
Well, yeah, no, but yeah, chicken and waffles, chicken and waffles. Is that a thing? That's not a thing over there, right?
No,
Yeah, chicken and waffles, man. That's part of my childhood. So yeah,
it's
yeah.
that and the ice cream cake. We've previously spoken about this ice cream cake. It
When
was
you
delicious.
when you texted me last week, I had ice cream cake, not from the same spot, but I was eating ice cream cake. So probably not the
Also,
best example of me saying that,
um,
but yeah,
one thing that I was shocked about when I was across there is
yeah.
Ben and Jerry's is an actual shop.
Oh yeah, yeah. I
Um,
sometimes forget
but
about that too. Yeah.
we now have one in Edinburgh.
How far is that for you?
45 minutes,
45 minutes.
50
Have you
minutes.
gone to stop by and give it a try?
Nah, not yet. I found it in the 12th of February.
Hmm.
You might actually enjoy this. We went, me and my fiance went to see Avatar: The Last Airbender Orchestra. Phenomenal,
Oh,
by the way.
awesome. I think I saw
Um,
you on social media too.
yeah, so yeah, I was pumped. And then when we were walking back to the car, I saw and I was like, we need to, we need to go.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. Maybe, yeah, yeah. So I think our athletes would train a little differently. So yeah,
100%. But like,
exactly.
that also then is another
Mhm.
huge factor is that nutrition piece and how again
Yeah,
you've
yeah.
got athletes that make have just came from training or have training afterwards. Like
Mhm.
how big is that piece for you and providing that extra? Hey, you've just finished the session. I know you've got a session coming up. Let's make sure you hit some of these key aspects of performance.
Yeah, for nutrition specifically.
Yeah, or just
Yeah. So
recovery in general.
oh, okay, gotcha, gotcha. So I'll say this first. So I don't have any certification or license or a license to for nutrition or everything of that sort. But under my education and paradigm, and obviously just talking to very smart and educated people that are nutritionists or are registered dietitians, I've been able to kind of take bits of information that I could apply and I could give it to my athletes, right? There's some things I keep to myself because I'm like, okay, like I'll give that a try. Let's give that. It might not be as you know um, great. Let's just say that.
Mhm.
Let's give that term. But I might not want to give that to like 14-year-old Jimmy or whatever it may be. And I'm not talking about steroids. Let's just take that out the window. No, I don't. I don't promote PEDs, but just other little things that are a little bit more experimental. And obviously, I wouldn't want to throw that at anyone. So yeah, I'll come there first going forward. But with nutrition and recovery as well, um, Washington, so Seattle is a very cold state. We, like I said, you've kind of been through it here. We are rainy and outcasted and cold 90% of the year, right?
It's Scotland
So
on
I'll give a
steroids.
perfect. There you go. There you go. But I'll give a perfect example too. So during the summertime, a lot of the athletes aren't used to doing a full workout while it being like 90 degrees and this is Fahrenheit as well. So 90 degrees or 85 degrees, right? So there's kind of definitely kind of a paradigm shift. I know the people in the Midwest, especially the track athletes, they're on fire. They're in terms of like they're doing a great job in that whether that's what they're used to running in. So they're awesome. But I myself and some of the athletes, they don't have that adaptation for it. So you'll kind of see them after the sprints or in the middle of the sprints. We're not doing cardio, by the way. We're doing anaerobic work, and then you'll see it. They're lethargic. They're slow. You would think because it's a little warmer, their body temperature is higher, the viscosity component in their muscle tendon unit is little bit looser, right? But that's just not the case, right? So because they're off putting O2, low or anything of that sort, just a bit faster than what they would normally do. So they don't have the capability of that. So I always got gummy bears on standby. So some types of sugars. So I got sugars on standby. And then Chris Corfus, if people are familiar with with a great track coach as well. One thing that he did one year with his athletes was before their track meets, and this got him some. This got the athletes some PBs and everything that sort. They would just eat some gummy worms, right? Because here's the
Mm.
thing: a lot of people just don't eat enough. They don't eat enough to fuel their body, right? I saw it a lot during the summer too. It's hot, you're running, you're doing a full workout, and you're just feeling lethargic, not feeling great, right? You got to eat. You got to eat to fuel your body, right? And I think nowadays too, and I'm sure this is kind of skewing in this direction nowadays for everyone, not just in our industry, but in the world population in general. We're starting to kind of understand the importance of fueling ourselves for our necessary activities throughout the day. And then I'm glad because it's creating a healthy relationship with nutrition and activity and living your lifestyle, right? And I don't want to obviously turn into a full discussion of that because I'm not the most adept to nutrition or public health matters, right? But truth is, that's how he got some good PBs this year. He was just making sure his kids and his athletes that just ate some gummy worms, right? So I always got those on standby. Um, and then in terms of recovery as well, and you'll see it too, like when after they eat some gummy worms, some of the athletes after they're kind of feeling crappy, they just start lighting up, and you're like, oh, okay, gotcha. Please don't rely on me for your source of food, but now you know. So, because I gotta feed myself too, right? So, um, let's see. So recovery. One thing that I do when I talk to a lot of people about is I talk to them about saunas. I talk to them about obviously sleep, and I always promote sleep and nutrition first. I'm like, if your sleep and nutrition is crap, I could give you everything else, and then these are just little sprinkles on your Sunday. You need to get the vanilla, you need to get the base of it, right? So if you're sleeping, obviously nutrition is crap, then me doing this is kind of just shifting the
Mm.
needle like 1%, right? And obviously to being a strength conditioning coach and being in a position to modulate intensities and volume, I need to take responsibility as well, because I also got to take in consideration the sports coaches volumes as well. So me just being egotistical, I could just be like, oh, it's not my fault, but it could very well could be. Are
Mm.
they able to recover from that load? So I got to take that in consideration as well. But I would say I am more guilty of undertraining people than overtraining people. So I would say that for the most part. And I don't want to make sure I push people into the point where they can't have the ability to have super compensation happen,
Mm.
right? So we're kind of taking everything day by day, especially with the athletes that I work with. But something that I harp on a lot, if it's not just sleep and nutrition, would be what did I just say? I said sauna,
Mm.
and I said water emergence. So not just cold water emergence, so not like a cold contrast tub, but being neck deep up into the water and doing activity through there. So kind of just like moving around and everything of that sort. So those are the two things. The closest thing that I could get in facility to it would just be like compression boots. So those like body
Mm.
thighs and like the Normatex or anything of that sort. So that's something that I could provide in person with athletes too. If it's not just reflexive performance reset. Obviously, that's a huge thing with recovery. I promote belly breathing, so diaphragmatic breathing. That's obviously a big thing too. So being able to be in a parasympathetic tone, so they could increase the exposure that they are in that recovered state. So doing that as well.
What
Um,
are you using the
and
boots
then
for?
let's just for recovery. So like after let's say an athlete's workout, um, and I like to really think about the facility as their second home or their third place. So a lot of people have their one, two, and three when it comes to places. So they got their home, they got their house. So in their home, they got their comfort, they got their family, and then they got place number two. And place number two for the people that I usually work with is school or sports. So it's whether my second place is school or my second place is where my club team trains. That's my second place, right? So I really want to promote the fact that our facility is their third place. So stay here, make your friends, bring your friends with you, talk to your girlfriend after your workout on the couch, not during or before, after your workout. I go and talk about how you just got a bench press PR or something like that, man. but also recover. So we'll see the athletes that are just in the recovery boots, anywhere from like 10 to 30, sometimes like, yeah, 10 to 30 minutes usually. And they're just kind of getting that compression throughout their whole entire leg. I don't have any other modalities in terms of that. So,
Mhm.
or for pneumatics, I don't have the shoulder. I don't have the back ones. We
How
also
eff-
have a body temperer.
how
Kind of like,
effective do you think they are?
and I'll be honest, I go back and forth with that all the time, right? So there's obviously research that promotes the usage of it. There's research out there that says it's a very you could make better use of your time, right? But I think what people take that don't take into consideration is the art of placebo, the science of
Mm,
placebo, right? Um, and your mind is a lot more powerful than you know. It's like talking to yourself before you're in your blocks, right, for a track meet, or visualizing how you're going to get over the hurdles. Or let's say if I'm bouncing the ball for 3 free throws, right? So I'm trying to think like, oh, I know I can. I've done this. What do I do? Breathe in, envision it, right? So it's all about this positive self talk and imagery of higher self, right? So our mind is very strong. So we need to kind of believe in that first. So I don't think a lot of scientific literature takes into account is psychology when it comes
mm,
to, let's say, like these placebo like effects. So let's say for me, like if I could throw on the boots, that might not help me at all. It literally might not help me directly through physiology. And I need to do more things with it as well. But for, let's say, Brandon, so Chew, right? He throws them on. He's like, oh man, like I just feel better. I feel like I could move. I could feel like that, right? I'm not going to take that superpower away from him because now mentally he's ready to get going, or he's like, oh, I feel relaxed, right? Do I think there's some physiological effects to it? Yes, I do think, um, because there's a pressure differential, there's different byproducts that could get out of the body a little bit faster in certain parts, right? I think it is has some sort of idea in closeness to that deep water immersion. So going over here, right, for recovery, but obviously it's not to the extent, right, because your torso isn't being has no pneumatic biased or no pneumatic application to it, just because we have the boots. But yeah, do you have any thoughts on that as well? Because that's actually something I wanted to ask people about.
yeah, so I've tried a couple different brands, and
Hmm.
again, we kind of spoke about it on the last episode with True. It's like we
Yeah.
are jaded to a lot of things. So like we, although sometimes we don't want to, we come with the skepticism of certain things and products. I don't know
Hmm.
if it's the same for you, but for me, I'm always looking at like, okay, this is what's supposed to do, but like, how do I actually feel? And
Yeah.
sometimes my bias can be like, oh, this is bullshit. So then
Yeah.
that placebo might not work to the full extent. But then
Hmm.
again, if people are selling placebo, then where's the ethics in that? So I have tried a couple different brands,
Hmm.
and I will say, although I feel great for a couple minutes after, so I've kind of run an experiment. I'm not just chatting shit. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um I did midday ish,
Yeah.
and then see how the rest of the day was. And like for the first like half hour, I was feeling great, but then it just went back to what I was previously feeling. So I was kind of like,
Yeah.
well, this didn't work. But I've also tried like an overnight. So just before going to sleep, put them on, do like a 15 to 20-minute session, take them off, sleep, because obviously the best recovery and adaptation comes from sleep.
Yeah.
So I tried it there. Although you do feel a little bit better, but it's still not to the same extent of like a nice ice bath afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and again, percentages from without having any measurables. Like I do feel like sometimes the DOMs come a lot quicker, which is a good step in the recovery process. Obviously, like I'm usually like a 2 dayer, but if I do the right
Mhm.
amount of things, I can get my DOMs the day after, which that to
Yeah.
me is like a decent step from my norm.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. Yeah. One thing I've also tried too, and then with yeah, with the compression boots, I always go back and forth about it too. Like I kind of feel the same way too for myself when I've tried it. I feel better right after and all that. But I usually also have a workout right after I use the boots.
Hmm.
Then I'll kind of go back to kind of baseline state. So there could be some bias and timing with that as well. But anecdotally, it did help out, or anecdotally, I should say. But one other thing that I have tried for recovery as well for myself and a few people is infrared. So like an infrared
Mm.
laser, not infrared sauna, because obviously I don't have a sauna in
Okay, I was
my.
going to say, are you shining red lights on you, or are you actually embedded in the lights?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I wish. But yeah, some people that I've tried to do is infrared like laser, so it'll just be like in contact with their skin. Obviously, if and then like I said, this is just kind of some woo woo stuff. So things that are kind of adding, but like the sprinkles on Sunday that I talked about. Um, but it has helped with lower down some inflammation in some people. Do I think it's everything? No, but if that's what helps for some people, like I'm totally for it as well. What I tell people to do in their own time too is obviously um, I kind of harp on saunas time to time, so that's always good. But the one that I always harp on is like the vertically immersed. Yeah, the whole bed. That's a lot, but mine was just more of like the it's
Yeah, I pull.
what's the
Sorry, I pull
yeah.
this up uh, because this is one that I know is really good, and if
Oh
you've got, um, let me see how much it is. It's a lot of money, like a lot of
yeah.
money. But if you've got it, like those are like the golden standard.
Sorry, you're cutting out real quick, or one of us is cutting out. I think
Yeah.
I
No,
missed.
I was just saying I pulled that one up specifically because that one is like the golden standard.
Oh, yeah, awesome, awesome. There you go. Might have to look a little bit more into it. But going back to so I've used the body temperer. So the ones that we had at UW for a little bit. I only have
Mhm.
the one that's 110, but yeah, I'll use. Obviously, that's not something that like you just use on yourself. I mean, you can, but you're not able to kind of use your hamstrings or back with it. So that's something that I've utilized with for recovery for some of my athletes as well, just because it kind of helps clot the tissues. We talk about voodoo flossing. I would say that's more like rehabilitative or
Mhm.
prehab as well. So it's not something I
I'm
harp on
always
too much, but it's,
Yeah, I'm always very surprised that when people bring up voodoo flossing, and
yeah,
when Kanan brought it up, I was like,
yeah,
I got again, voodoo flossing was a thing when how old was I? I would have been 18, 19. So like
yeah,
it was a while, like it was more than 10 years ago.
yeah, yeah,
And like the fact that coaches are still like using it, I'm kind of like fuck yeah, because
yeah.
it was, I can't remember where I saw it. I can't, I think it was some website that I found, and I was like, let me try it, see what happens.
Yeah, yeah,
And like again, I've always had that experimental side, but it was
yeah,
like it was kind of mad because like it's a baby BFR,
yeah, yeah.
and you're kind of just like moving through it. I think that's what I initially liked about it, is because you move through it, you then release, and it sort of sends this rush through.
hmm
Um, and the kind of way that I was looking at the time was, um, although tendons and ligaments don't get all that much blood through it, like how can I optimally pump through blood in places that blood doesn't run through all that much, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And going to your point too, with the whole blood rush thing for like GPP, like as simple as it sounds too. And then this is all kind of pulling methodologies from everywhere else too. Like I'll still have people do tricep extension with bands for like 100 to 200 reps. So like West Side, so like Louis, right? Just because we're trying to get those tendons healthy and everything of that sort, right? I usually do it with upper body. I don't really do it with the lower body too much. I know they would do banded hamstring curls, everything of that sort. They do knee extensions. Knee extensions is one that I'll do, but we do a lot of sled walking. We do a
Mm.
lot of marches for the GPP, so strengthening the post chain, so hamstrings, like foot, so foot ankle complex, so everything of that sort. So soleus, gastroc, um, and then still walking in place with them with the pins. We got a rhino belt squat now. So we used to have a West Side barbell belt squat, but we got the rhino one, so we'll load that one up. We haven't loaded it up as heavy with our marches, but we'll still load it up pretty dang heavy. So we use that for GPP as well. So getting some blood flow in there. Not as much, I would say, for the marches, but I'd say a little bit more for like the 200 reps of the triceps extensions. We'll do face pulls as well. We'll do bicep curls with it, everything of that sort. And then yeah, it's been working. So people have been feeling better as well. But that's kind of going back to like how do we get blood flow back in those connective
Mm,
tissues. Um, but yeah, I think we're on the same page with that as well. And I think too with the whole voodoo band thing as well, just because those connective tissues are now because you're moving through a range of motion as well. So I'll usually, let's say if someone's having a knee, I'll put a voodoo band on them and have them walk, do knee extensions. Same thing with their ankle, right? So if it's around their ankle, kind of move through certain ranges of motion, right? So just because those like we always think about muscle when it comes to injuries, then we also think of tendons and ligaments, but we kind of take in considerate we don't really take in consideration fascia and how these connective tissues glide amongst each other as well. Because I know things could get sticky, you could get have adhesions. Um, right? Fascia is very viscoelastic in nature, right? So if there's like some type of tension, so in the whole tensegrity model of like your fascial system in the body, right? There's going to be a pull somewhere else. There's going to push somewhere else, right? So kind of getting those connective tissues to glide upon each other. That's kind of one of my theories behind it as well. But I know it's helped me in the past. It's helped athletes that I work with in the past as well. So that's like a rehabilitative prehab recovery modality.
mm,
But yeah, and then going back to, I don't think I got to talk about the deep water immersion, but anytime because there's a lot of pools out here too for the summertime. As cold as
mm,
Washington is, people have pools. I don't know why, it just is a thing. So so when someone's like vertically immersed for a pool, right? So it gets all the joints away from gravity, which undoes the effects of gravity. So think about like how a reverse hyper distraction on your spine or a belt squat distraction on your spine or anything of that sort. Or if you're just doing like traction hanging from a bar, right? I know everyone thinks about that when it comes to like, oh, you see how the spine like decompresses, right? So when we're in the water, we're kind of doing undoing the effects of gravity. So when you're immersed during deep water, so up to about neck level, you have two low pressure systems, right? You have venous return to the heart and the superficial lymphatic, which is pumps out all of the waste products from the body. And due to the high pressure differential, right? Because now that I am in a different, pretty much substance, right? I'm not in water, I'm not gravity, I'm not walking, I'm in deep water. That's where that pressure differential happens. So this just goes to the lymph ducts, to the bloodstream, and then to the kidneys. And over time, obviously, in this process, well, it's going to be sped up and gone. So that's something that I harp on about as well. And then yeah, as long as they have a pool, that's
mm. That's a
um,
limiting factor.
yeah, yeah, yeah. As long as they have a pull. So I'll also have them do like mobility, or I'll say like, oh yeah, you should do some mobility drills, move through ranges of motion as well. If you want to, if there's like someone that wants to work on their sprints, right? So I'll just be like, just do your A skips, right? Just do your B skips, all that sort to kind of gets you mentally there as well. But also kind of gets those joints moving as well through that. But yeah, with the Venus return, and it's really good for middle and long distance runners too. So with the vertical emergence with Venus return, you get rushed back to the right side of the heart, which has an increase in stroke volume. And then also,
Mhm.
this must be done horizontally. So there's there's some deviance with that. But yeah, I also don't really love A skips for too many yards, just because of,
People are
or
people
A
people are starting to hate on them.
yeah, I shouldn't say A skips. I'll say I don't love the boom booms as much. And I'll do it myself. I still do it to myself. And the reason why is just because there's a lot of oscillation times to times at the hip, right? So if I'm right here, so you go 1 2 1 2 1 2, right? The switches, the things that people love to do. But sometimes you'll see oscillation at their hip, so they'll be like 1 2, right? 1 2. Like where in sprinting are do we want a lot of oscillation during the sprint? We want stability, right? I mean that's one of the big things with overspeed training. With if you're not able to stabilize the hip, you're not going to be put under overspeed training. As at least you shouldn't. And if you are, then you should probably consider why you're doing that or why the person you're working with is giving you that, right? Because if you're not able to stabilize through the lumbopelvic region during sprinting, then you're going to start overreaching, or you're going to start braking, or you're going to start going greater than 40 newtons of ground contact force, which means you're braking way more than you should be. And then now you're actually slowing yourself down and giving yourself a possibility for injury. But hey, if you want to do ace skips underwater, go ahead. So yeah,
Appreciate you so much for coming back on, even though we
yeah,
just filmed another podcast.
of course, man.
I know that you kind of want to work on a different platform, but if you let everyone know where they can find you and sort of reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I could find me through Instagram. So there you go, Nathan underscore Allas Instagram. I haven't been posting as much like strength conditioning, exercise physiology, exercise science, or just things of that in general. This past year, I've been pretty busy. Also been having mixed feelings about myself, posting things on social media about that. I know Chu and Manny kind of harped on me about it, so we'll see what happens. But if you have any strength conditioning topics or anything of that sort, go ahead, hit me up through there. I know the stuff that I used to post used to be very wordy, and it wasn't pretty. It wasn't Instagram pretty. I'm definitely not a marketer or an advertiser, so I'm definitely not an influencer. I kind of just spit out the information. If you want to read it, go ahead. Um, so I'm very, very like that in that fashion.
Hmm.
But apparently, I make my collages look very pretty and my pictures look pretty per Manny and everything of that sort. So I guess that's just my personal life, right? But yeah, so yeah, you can find me through there. I don't have any other social media that I use, I would say, in terms of that. But maybe I'll get something in the midst, and I could, if people are open to listen to or want to listen to, I'll get something
You should
going on
never
that.
think about it that way. You should think about posting it so you can get your thoughts out.
Yeah, yeah, maybe. But who needs that when I got you, man? So, but
I
yeah,
I need that.
yeah, there you go.
I
Maybe
need
we'll just do
that.
more. We'll just FaceTime each other. We'll do more podcasts together. You got an iPhone now, right?
Yeah.
See, there you go. You could. This guy used to be a Android user. I remember that. That was the whole conversation at
Do
UW
you want to
too.
know why I switched?
Why'd you switch?
Coach AJ gave me so much shit. He bullied me into getting one.
Hey man, don't you like
The
it
first
better?
the first person I texted when I got this phone set up was AJ. And I was
Yeah.
like, peep the blue bubble. And he was like, hey.
Yeah, there we go, man. Yeah, absolutely. Um, but yeah. So I love getting connected with other professionals in the field too. So um, I might not be promoting everything as much as I do, but I love to pick people's brains and everything of that sort. So yeah. Or if people just like to go snowboarding or anything like that too, because I guess that's what you'll just see on my social media. So if there's something to take away from that. But yeah, man.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much, Nate.
Of course, man. Appreciate you too. We'll get one in again soon. Okay.
Peace.